This is chapter 2 of the last session. It is called The Unseen Shadow. Dr. Sarah White couldn't shake the unease that had settled deep within her after her first session with Justin Walker. As she drove home, the city lights blurred into a haze, her mind replaying the conversation over and over. His fear was so visceral, so intense, it had seeped into her, leaving her feeling vulnerable in a way she hadn't experienced before. Arriving home, Sarah tried to shake off the day. She lived alone in a modest, tastefully decorated apartment. The familiar surroundings usually comforted her, but tonight they felt different, colder, more distant. She brewed a cup of herbal tea, hoping it would calm her nerves, and settled onto the couch with a book. But her thoughts kept drifting back to Justin. Why couldn't she let it go? She had dealt with troubled patients before, patients with delusions, deep-seated fears and paranoid tendencies. Yet, something about Justin's case felt wrong. His paranoia wasn't just a symptom. It felt like a warning. But of what? The silence in her apartment was interrupted by a soft tapping sound. Sarah frowned, setting her book down. The tapping continued, rhythmic and persistent, coming from the direction of the kitchen. She rose slowly, heart pounding, trying to convince herself it was nothing more than a tree branch against the window. But when she reached the kitchen, the sound stopped. The windows were closed and there were no branches near them. The room was empty, still, and yet she felt an unsettling presence, as if someone, or something, had just left. She stood there for a moment, holding her breath, her eyes scanning the shadows. With a shaky laugh, Sarah scolded herself for letting Justin's fears get to her. She was a professional, a scientist of the mind. She knew how easily fear could manifest into imagined threats. She returned to the living room, but the sense of unease lingered, a shadow that refused to lift. The next day, Sarah arrived at her office earlier than usual, hoping to immerse herself in her work and push away the lingering doubts. She had back-to-back sessions scheduled, but she couldn't stop thinking about her 3 p.m. appointment with Justin. As she prepared for her morning appointments, she noticed something strange. Her notes from the previous day's session were missing. She distinctly remembered placing them on her desk before she left, but now they were gone. She searched the entire office, growing increasingly frantic. Losing notes was not just unprofessional, it was dangerous. Those notes were crucial to understanding and treating her patients. After an hour of searching, she found the notes tucked away in a drawer she rarely used. Relief washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by confusion. How did they get there? She couldn't recall putting them in that drawer. Shaking her head, she brushed it off as a moment of forgetfulness, perhaps the result of the stress Justin's case was causing. But as she went through the notes, something felt off. Certain details seemed different from what she remembered writing. Small changes. Phrases that didn't sound like her, words she wouldn't normally use. But the most disturbing change was a single line scrawled at the bottom of the last page in handwriting that wasn't hers. "They're watching you too." Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she stared at the words. A chill ran down her spine, the same feeling she had when Justin had spoken of the unseen figures stalking him. She checked her office door. It had been locked when she arrived, as always. The windows were shut. No one else had access to her office but her and the cleaning staff, and they wouldn't touch her notes. Her mind raced, searching for a rational explanation. Perhaps it was a prank, a colleague playing a cruel joke. But who would do such a thing, and why? The words echoed in her mind, stirring an irrational fear that someone had invaded her personal space, her sanctuary. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Her other sessions felt distant, her mind only half present as she kept thinking about Justin and the strange note. By the time 3 p.m. rolled around, she was more than eager to see Justin again, hoping to find some answers, if not about the note, then at least about his condition. When Justin arrived, he seemed even more unsettled than before. He looked thinner, more haggard, as if he hadn't slept in days. His eyes darted around the room, never settling on anything for more than a few seconds. He sat down in the chair opposite her, his hands gripping the armrests as if he were bracing himself for something terrible. "Justin," Sarah began cautiously, "how have you been feeling since our last session?" Justin's eyes flicked to hers for a brief moment before skittering away. "Worse," he whispered. "Much worse. I've been seeing them more often, feeling them closer. They're not just shadows anymore, Dr. Sarah. They're real." Sarah leaned forward, her voice steady. "What do you mean by real, Justin? Have you seen them directly?" He nodded, his face pale. "Yes. Last night I woke up, and one of them was standing at the foot of my bed. I couldn't see its face, but it was there, watching me. I tried to move, to scream, but I couldn't. It was like I was paralyzed. I don't know how long it stood there before it finally disappeared, but it felt like hours." A cold dread washed over Sarah as she listened. The fear in Justin's voice was genuine, and the details he described, paralysis, the presence at the foot of the bed, were eerily similar to sleep paralysis, a phenomenon she had read about before. But there was something more to his story, something that didn't fit into the usual psychological explanations. "Justin," she said slowly, "have you noticed anything else strange? Anything that might seem unrelated but feels connected?" He hesitated, then nodded. "The other night I found something in my apartment, a piece of paper with writing on it. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't there before. The handwriting. It didn't look human." Sarah's breath caught. "What did it say?" Justin's eyes locked onto hers, filled with a terror so deep it made her stomach twist. "It said, 'You're next.'" The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, sending a surge of panic through her. She struggled to maintain her composure, her mind racing with questions. Had Justin somehow seen the note in her office? Was it possible that his paranoia was spreading, infecting her mind with his fears? She quickly ended the session, feeling a sudden, overwhelming need to be alone, to think. But as she watched Justin leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't the only one being watched, that something dark and malevolent had turned its attention to her as well. As she locked up her office for the night, she glanced down the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. The building was quiet, the other offices dark and empty. But in the shadows at the far end of the hall, she thought she saw a figure, a tall, dark silhouette, just standing there, watching her. She blinked, and it was gone. For a moment, Sarah stood frozen, her mind racing. She had to be imagining things, letting Justin's fears get to her. But deep down, a part of her knew this was no mere trick of the light. Something was wrong, and it was only just beginning. With trembling hands, she turned and hurried out of the building, her footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. As she reached the parking lot, she glanced around one last time, half expecting to see that shadowy figure again. But the lot was empty. And yet, as she drove home, the feeling of being watched stayed with her, growing stronger with every mile. And for the first time, Dr. Sarah White began to fear that she was in far more danger than she had ever imagined.